What is up, guys? As you all know from the name of this channel, I'm Kevin. This is Talkin' History with Kev, and this is our first YouTube episode for my viewers on Facebook. I'm sorry that you have to listen to my voice twice if you should end up following my YouTube channel. So, what are we going to do on this channel? Because we're kind of new to this type of filming. So we'll be doing lectures, we'll be exploring historic sites, all kinds of stuff like that. And don't worry, the lectures, they'll actually be fun and not boring like you all might think. So, in order to not bore you guys, let's get right into something. A little lesson on 1980s pop culture and its regard to the Cold War. So, this lecture here, this is based on original research that I did for a publication called the Canacadea Review. It's an Alfred University publication. Totally recommend it. Go to AURA, Alfred University. Just look it up on Google and look up Canacadea Review when you get there. It's the library archive page. So, what did I do? Like, what kinds of pop culture were involved in the Cold War in the 1980s? Well, for starters, you had music. So music, we all love music now, don't we? We love rock, we love pop, we love hip hop, we love rap, country, whatever. You get the idea. There were a ton of messages about the Cold War in 1980s music. So you had Billy Joel with We Didn't Start the Fire, for starters. Greatest history lesson in the form of a song ever. He mentions names like Khrushchev, Malenkov, Joseph Stalin, Russians in Afghanistan. These were all Cold War references to guys who either ran the Soviet Union, or in the case of Russians in Afghanistan, you had him talking about the Russian invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, continued all throughout the 80s. Big war, that's a subject for a different episode. We'll talk about it at some point. I don't know when, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, so you had Billy Joel talking about that stuff in We Didn't Start the Fire. You definitely had a lot of messages about it in a song by the rock band Survivor called Burning Heart. Now, the lyrics to that song are clear as day in reference to the Cold War. You have lyrics going like, two worlds collide, rival nations. It's a primitive clash, venting years of frustrations. Bravely we hope against all hope. There is so much at stake. Seems our freedom's up against the ropes. Does the crowd understand? Is it East versus West, or man against man? Can any nation stand alone? Now, if that doesn't describe relations between the U.S. West and the Soviet Union East during most of the 20th century, then I don't know what does, because that just screams Cold War. You also had 99 Red Balloons by the German group Nina. So that song, it's a little hard to understand for some people. I don't know if people would really think of it as a Cold War song, but it really is. It's talking about fear of, Soviet UFOs, dropping, explosives on the West. So just try to dissect that song. if you want to. Further listening, Nina, 99 Red Balloons. Listen to the English version because I can't understand the German version at all. Yeah, that was tough at first while doing the research. So what else did I have in there for music? I had, let's see here. I had quite a bit for music. So, yeah, there was also electronic music back in the 80s. Definitely Depeche Mode was one of the premier electronic groups back then. And incidentally enough, they've got some pretty good messages that could be related to the Cold War or other social issues at the time. It's called People Are People by Depeche Mode. Totally recommend it. It is a bop. Anyway, so there's lyrics in this song that go kind of like this. So with different colors and with different creeds, with different people and different needs, it's obvious you hate me, though I've done nothing wrong. I've never even met you, so what could I have done? Another set of lyrics that could be alluding to the Cold War is, people are people, so why should it be that you and I should get along so awfully? I mean, heck, the US and the Soviet Union got along not very good throughout the 20th century, as we've established plenty of times. The relationship was frigid. And by frigid, I mean you couldn't have worse relations between two nations like in the history of almost ever. Probably ever. Anyway, like I said, I'm trying to make this fun for you guys. If you don't like it, then keep listening, please. I love you guys. Anyway, what else do we got for music? Oh, I think that was it for my essay. Actually, no, it wasn't. Because another aspect of the music scene during the 80s was how much of an effect it had on people in Russia. Like, y'all might think of the Soviet Union as a police state and a communist state where, oh, they didn't allow people to, listen to Western music. Well, guess what? They really didn't. But that didn't stop people because people were smuggling stuff in. People were screaming for Western culture over there. People were fed up at that point in time because, number one, they couldn't express what they thought about their government. And number two, they just were kind of rebellious at that point because of point number one that I made. So anyway, smuggling movies was very common. Smuggling music was common. The government couldn't stop the people, no matter how much they tried to. In the end, democracy was on the rise in the USSR by the end of the 80s. So teenagers and people wanting West culture were, they were kind of at the point where they were able to, because a good guy that is named Mikhail Gorbachev, my good pal Gorby, rest in peace, bud. He with his programs Glasnost and Perestroika, he was finally allowing people to, number one, express themselves in their disdain for their government, but also express themselves through being able to listen to Western music and watch Western movies and read Western magazines. Trust me, it was going to happen at some point. Gorbachev just made the change happen. Just like music, and actually, speaking of music, there was one more song that I found. It had kind of a hidden message to the Cold War, but it's called Wild Wild West by the Escape Club. Another bop. Y'all should listen to it. Check it out. Wild Wild West by the Escape Club. It had lyrics in there that were kind of promoting Western culture. Like, and, you know, just the way that it was getting better throughout the 80s, progressing into the 90s. Of course, there's the chorus that, you know, goes, heading for the 90s, living in the wild, wild west. Anyway, I am a bad singer, but you get the point. A direct Cold War message that people probably don't get from the lyrics of that song is the words, Ronnie's got a new gun. Of course, we know Ronald Reagan was tough on communism. That's what they were talking about. Ronnie had a new gun and he came in on communism, guns blazing. Anyway, so that wraps up music. So how about movies? There were plenty of movies alluding to the Cold War. Number one, Rocky IV. So if any of you have seen Rocky IV, hopefully you have, because if you haven't, then like you need to, because Rocky IV is just a thrill of a movie to watch. Of course, we all know who Rocky is. Boxer, played by Sylvester Stallone. The big guns. Anyway, don't entertain my BS, because I'm pumped up about my subject, but that's a good thing. Anyway, so it was the fourth installment of the Rocky film series. The film found Rocky Balboa, who was the heavyweight champion of the world, fighting against Ivan Drago, the big Soviet boxer who had killed Rocky's best friend Apollo Creed early in the movie during an exhibition bout in Las Vegas. And Rocky finds himself having to train in Siberia. We all know Siberia, not a pleasant place for anyone to go, Russian or American, because guess what? It's freaking cold out there. Anyway, I don't know that, but I don't really want to know about that. But historically, very cold in Siberia. Big Russian polar bear. Anyway, I need to stop. But not to mention, he winds up having to go toe-to-toe not just with Drago, but with a very hostile Soviet crowd, because the fight was held in Moscow. But by the end of the film, he has the crowd on his side, because he's kind of just showing this American grit and will to win. And he actually moves the crowd with the last lines of the film, saying that if I can change and you can change, then everybody can change. And Mikhail Gorbachev was already the leader of the Soviet Union by that point in time, and he's actually played in this film, and he's depicted as applauding Rocky Balboa, and he's all for changes. And in real life, Gorbachev made the changes happen. We'll have to do a full episode on Mikhail Gorbachev at some point. Anyway, long story short, I didn't really allude to this before, but Rocky defeated Drago, all that stuff. And then there was another movie that had Cold War messages. It was Red Dawn, featured Patrick Swayze, whom we can all agree he was probably one of the best looking dudes in the 80s, if not all time, because Patty Swayze, yeah. Anyway, sorry. Rest in peace. But so, the film portrays Swayze's character fighting against the Soviet invasion of the United States. And there's a family standing up to fight against the USSR to protect their hometown in Colorado and free their father and patriarch from captivity. of the Soviets. And it presented a strong message about what ordinary people in America thought about the Soviet Union or might have actually done in response to a Soviet invasion of the U.S. Of course, nobody knows what would happen what would have happened if the Soviets had invaded the U.S. Actually, nobody really knows what a modern invasion of the U.S. would look like, because the U.S. hasn't been invaded since 1812, when the British invaded, and the Revolutionary War. You get the point. So it came at a time in 1984, this movie Red Dawn, when relations between the U.S. and the Soviet Union were not great. Brezhnev had died, Andropov had died, Chernenko had just come into power, and the threat of nuclear war was not gone. It stayed present throughout even the ending years of the Cold War. So it's no surprise that a movie portraying a conflict between the two powers had some strong messages about the Cold War in general. To go along with movies, and I could talk about plenty of movies that had Cold War messages, but for time's sake, television had a big influence too. You had MTV, where musicians were able to show what kinds of messages they were sending with their songs, as well as tell them with their lyrics. This goes along with what I said about music. If you need a refresher, turn back a few minutes. And throughout the decade, MTV was the man when it came to music and music videos, because it was 24/7. People had access to it all day, every day of the year. And another perspective people would have viewed the Cold War on TV is through international sporting events like the Olympics. Who can forget, in 1980, people watched on TV as the U.S. Olympic hockey team, made up of college kids, mind you, college kids, absolutely just, they didn't wreck the Soviets because it was only a score of 4-3, but they beat the big Soviet bear. The Soviet hockey team, they were the best in the world. Absolute best. So, and people were also, holding up signs saying, "Get out of Afghanistan." And there were, you had this amidst the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, like I just said. And that year's Summer Games in Moscow had been boycotted for a bit because of the invasion. And so the Americans beat the Russians. We now know it as the Miracle on Ice. American self-esteem went through the roof as a result of this win. They wound up winning the gold medal a couple days later. In the Soviet Union, it was an absolute embarrassment, and among young and old folks alike, and it changed the dynamics of how Russians viewed their athletes. And actually, some of them began to slowly head west, largely through defection, though a few by the end of the 80s were permitted to leave. Slava Fetisov, one of the best Russians to ever play the game, great defenseman. For further viewing on that, watch Of Miracles and Men. It's streaming on ESPN+. I highly recommend it. It gives a Soviet perspective of the Miracle on Ice and how their hockey has changed, if you're into that. And also, another thing on the whole Soviet perspective, a lot of people, like I said, weren't really able to access pop culture in the West legally until the mid to late 80s, when Gorbachev started to thaw things. And a great example of one of the first ways in which people were able to directly access Western culture legally was in 1989. A lot of young people crammed into a stadium in Moscow, and they got to view a huge metal festival with the likes of Bon Jovi, Motley Crue, Skid Row, Cinderella, and the Prince of Darkness himself, Ozzy Osbourne, as well as some Russian acts like Gorky Park. It gave young people in the USSR a chance to just headbang and rock out to Living on a Prayer, Girls, 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 Youth Gone Wild, 18 in Life, stuff like that. And they just hadn't been able to do that for so long. And in addition to the mainstream festivals that started springing up around Eastern Europe, there were others that had roots in Eastern Europe, like the Estonian Song Festival. So Estonia was part of the Eastern Bloc. It was communist. But this festival had been going on since 1869, and by the end of the 80s, it became a major sounding board and gathering place for people to express their want for independence of Soviet rule. And political protests were sparked by this at that point. You also had magazines that were showing, different stuff. Time magazine is a great thing to access due to time constraints. Please look up Time magazine throughout the 1980s. You are going to find plenty of front page articles that involve the Cold War. And let's just sum all this up, okay? Because I've done a lot of talking. Now, like I said, the 80s had a lot of different pop cultural messages about the Cold War and Russia and communism. But, it's important we think about this stuff today because we've got a lot of sour relations going on with the Eastern world, whether it's Russia or China. And music, TV, movies, they have all been a way throughout history of crying out for peace, for good relations, and all that stuff. And this stuff in the 80s, it can still provide us help today with crying out for better relations between the West and Russia and China. And just, hopefully that happens soon, because I think I speak for a lot of people in the world, and I'm just a simple college student, whatever. I'm one guy, but and I'm a historian, and historians, I'm an up and coming historian, but historians usually don't give their opinions. But you know what? About this kind of stuff, it's nice just to be able to say, without political opinion or anything, that I hope we do achieve peace, because I see what's going on in Ukraine right now. That'll be a whole nother episode for us to talk about, I'm sure. But pop culture like this can really put into perspective things such as the war in Ukraine, that are going on in the world. And here's hoping that that different generations' cries for peace can actually make a difference in the world, can actually make people think. And with that, I think that's it for my topic. Being that this is my first episode, I can't really say as always, but if you like what you're seeing, hit that notification button, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and yeah, thank you for indulging with me in a great discussion about the history of 1980s pop culture and the Cold War. If you guys have any suggestions on stuff you'd like me to talk about, please comment. I'm open to any comments. Just try to keep it without any profanity. Don't be disrespecting each other. Not that people do that nowadays, because they totally do. But anyway, guys, thank you for listening. We'll see you guys next time. Good night.